With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Did you know they plan to build over 3,000 wind turbines on Queensland's Great Dividing Range? Over 3,700 kilometres of new haulage roads will carve through old-growth forest. Destroying forests for industrial renewables makes no sense. It doesn't have to be this way. The intact biodiverse ranges of Queensland are no place for renewables. Take 2 minutes to learn the truth about the destruction they cause. Go to rainforestreserves.org.au.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei declared that Iran had defeated what he described as U.S. and Israeli-backed unrest after authorities suppressed weeks of violent protests. The demonstrations, which began in late December over inflation and economic hardship, escalated into nationwide anti-government unrest that left hundreds dead among protesters and security forces. Khamenei accused the United States, Israel, and President Trump of orchestrating the unrest, citing Trump's public support for protesters and U.S. military deployments. Although a U.S. strike was reported as imminent, President Trump later said he called it off after Iran reversed plans to execute detained rioters. Khamenei said Iran would not seek war, but warned that those responsible would be held accountable. The White House confirmed that countries seeking permanent membership on President Trump's new Gaza Board of Peace are expected to contribute $1 billion toward reconstruction efforts, while temporary members face no minimum fee. President Trump will serve as the board's inaugural chairman, selecting participating countries and wielding broad authority. Funds raised are intended to finance rebuilding the war-damaged Gaza Strip as part of a three-phase peace plan. Phase 1 involved hostage releases and reduced Israeli military presence, while Phase 2 calls for Hamas to disarm and cede control to international peacekeepers and a technocratic government overseen by the board. Hamas has so far refused to disarm. European leaders reacted angrily after President Trump announced 10% tariffs on 8 European countries opposing U.S. control of Greenland. The affected nations had recently committed troops to the island, prompting Trump's move, which critics say risks escalating trade tensions. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned tariffs could undermine transatlantic relations, while EU ambassadors were summoned for crisis talks. Some European lawmakers suggested retaliatory measures, including stalling ratification of an EU-US trade deal or even boycotting the World Cup. Britain and France face added pressure as they rely on U.S. security guarantees for potential peacekeeping roles in Ukraine, limiting how far they can confront Washington. Pardoned January 6 defendant Jake Lang attempted to hold a pro-ICE rally in Minneapolis on January 17th, but his event was overwhelmed by hundreds of counter-protesters. Lang had promoted an anti-Islam, anti-Somali demonstration and announced plans to burn a Quran, prompting a tense standoff near City Hall. His supporters were drowned out and chased away, and Lang later appeared injured with visible bruises. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz mobilized the National Guard to assist law enforcement with traffic control and public safety amid ongoing unrest tied to expanded federal immigration enforcement in the Twin Cities, which has drawn daily protests and violent clashes following recent officer-involved shootings. Hundreds of protesters rallied in London against China's proposed relocation of its embassy to a large historic site near the Tower of London, days before a government decision on the plan. Demonstrators chanted slogans opposing the mega embassy and warned of national security risks, citing concerns about espionage and surveillance. Rights groups and critics of the Chinese Communist Party argue the site's proximity to sensitive underground communication cables could make it an intelligence hub. Protesters from Hong Kong and other diaspora communities said the embassy could serve as an operations base for transnational repression. British MPs have raised alarms after reports that plans include hundreds of rooms and concealed chambers beneath the site. U.S. Speaker Mike Johnson told the BBC diplomatic channels are the way to go over Greenland.
The UK and some of our native allies have people there now. Maybe that was the point. Maybe that all of our friends and allies around the world have recognized anew the importance of that geography and that placement, and hopefully we can all work on that together.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
Father wears his Sunday best. Mother's tired, she needs a rest. The kids are playing up downstairs. Sister's sighing in her sleep. Brother's got a date to keep, he can't hang around.
And then for the defence.
Our house it has a crowd. There's always something happening, and it's usually quite loud.
Safe with me. How long do you think we're gonna stay here for?
Our house, in the middle of our street. Our house, in the middle of our...
There is a problem with medicine, and we can explain what it is by looking back to the discovery of penicillin. Penicillin, it turns out, was not just an accidental finding. Alexander Fleming discovered that mould he found in a culture dish was killing bacteria, but it took over 10 years before a team at Oxford University were able to isolate the active ingredient. They produced small quantities for preclinical and clinical trials, helping prove the compound was safe and could beat infection. However, they couldn't produce it at scale. In 1941, Andrew Jackson Moyer of the US Department of Agriculture, the forerunner to the FDA, suggested changes to the manufacturing process, enabling mass production. It turns out medicines are not invented when someone discovers a new molecular entity. They are the product of key stakeholders working together collaboratively. Until medicine can be manufactured at scale, it may as well not exist. And in 2025, this is a problem. In the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies began outsourcing production. Suddenly the system was significantly less integrated. Someone with a new discovery today will find themselves disconnected from the rest of the development and manufacturing process. Companies that develop medicine are still happy to work with big established pharma companies, but the modern day Flemings are cut out of the system. The result is far fewer new medicines coming to market. We want to fix this by ensuring the pharma industry builds a more integrated supply chain. We also believe that doctors' expertise administering medicine should be included at the beginning of the process. We know that doctors on the front line have insights about how to repurpose medicine. Doctors should be able to report their findings so that the necessary testing can be completed and they can share their results worldwide. Learn more here and help us take medicines back to the future.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
A Monday to the Protagonist and the World Today. Hope you had a great weekend. Lots of turmoil in Australia, which we shall be talking about in this hour. A shocking terrorist attack took place on the 14th of December 2025. Most Australians understand what happened on that day. Or do they? Many, though, believe it wasn't a random attack and it was aimed squarely at the Jewish community. It was a terrible day and the whole of Australia stopped. But what most of us don't understand is why the perpetrators did what they did, why it was allowed to unfold as it did, what are the risks of it happening again, and what should be done about it. We have watched the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, act like someone hiding from responsibility to explain this shocking attack. Why is this? Nor can he convince us they have the matter in hand. Is this why we have this rush to introduce sloppy, poorly directed, draconian legislation. There will be new powers for prohibition to prohibit all these terrible crimes or supposed crimes, and the offences for hate groups, cancellation or refusal of visas, further gun controls. That's right, it's got to stop the farmers from carrying out terrorist activities, and the criminalisation of antisemitic and extremist conduct with penalties to follow. Most commentators are concerned that such legislation will restrict the rights of law-abiding citizens while leaving bad policies and the bad actors simply untouched. So where are we? Bad or unnecessary laws will be imposed to give the impression something is being done while we await the conclusions of a royal commission into anti-Semitism and social cohesion and the review into Australia's federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Is it an oxymoron using the word intelligence? Who knows? This will surely be followed by more laws, which may not make us any more safe. Our guest today are Robbie Barwick from the Australian Citizens Party, Mohammed Amin, MBE, a Muslim co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester, and Shane Shmuel from the Australian Jewish Association. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Robbie, this because you are involved in politics, and this smacks of nothing else but politics and power.
Yeah, well, as you know, the law that was originally unveiled a week ago is not going to pass now. Mm-hmm. And one of the main reasons for that is because Anthony Albanese definitely rushed it. My view, based on the work that our party's done for decades, is that we should even be questioning whether rushing to new laws is the right response, given that the existing laws we have, people would say, well, these existing laws must be deficient, but I have a different view because I was involved in the debates over the anti-terrorism laws that John Howard introduced after the 9/11 in 2002 in Australia. And he unveiled initial 7 anti-terrorism laws. But then that's always become the response to terrorism scares or terrorism incidents, more laws, and they've become increasingly draconian. I'll give you an example. The one in 2002 created a definition of terrorism, which initially was very, very broad, such that experts said it could sweep up a nurse on a union picket line. But because John Howard didn't try and ram them through in days, like Anthony Albanese tried to do, there was months and months of scrutiny of that law, and that definition was able to be improved significantly. Nevertheless, and I want to talk about this more in a minute, one of the other laws they passed equipped ASIO, our security agency, with enormous powers that it never had before, also a lot more resources. Those powers include questioning and detention powers, extremely broad powers, and it's had those powers ever since, plus a host of others. And every time we've had more events, there's been more powers given to ASIO and more terrorism laws passed. And they weren't enough to stop this attack, even though the attackers were known to ASIO. And so my question is, why should we assume that the right response is automatically more laws? Why shouldn't we be looking at what went wrong with the application of the existing laws? And that's why I'm glad that there's now a Royal Commission federally, because that can include scrutiny of agencies like ASIO, because I don't think it was satisfactory to have just a review of ASIO by an insider. These perpetrators were known to ASIO. ASIO has enormous powers, yet the attack was still able to happen. And I think it would be much more productive for everybody's sake for accountability in that area, rather than assuming you can rush through draconian new laws in days, and that's acceptable, let alone they'll work.
Yeah, Mohammed, thank you for joining us, by the way, from the UK. Government, I mean, I have to say, government, when it comes to these, they're doddering and walking around in circles with blindfolds or whatever. It's not, in many ways, they are trying to do or trying to fix something that is wrong. Where is government failing, though? Because in Australia, and it's been knocked on their head, and it was an embarrassing windback, as Robbie mentioned, it was an embarrassing windback of first of all, was going to do all these things, and now it's wound right back, so that therefore the oomph and the determination to stamp out whether it's Islamophobia or whether it's anti-Semitism or hate speech or whatever, it was rushed through. Government probably needs to, when it makes laws and when it decides it's going to change the basically the culture of a country, because in Australia we can be a little bit cruel at times. We have a sharp wit. We don't mind telling each other a few home truths, but then we have a beer. And that's sort of changing. Governments, Mohammed, probably need to take into account a lot more than what they're doing. And instead of having these, to me, it's very virtuous. Governments are going to do the right thing. What needs to be done?
Good afternoon, Mike. Well, first of all, there is a real issue. I mean, at the moment, if I were to try to encourage people to kill Shane Shmuel, I think I would be committing a criminal offence in Australia. It would certainly be committing a criminal offence in the UK. The question is, should I be able to organise a programme which says that all Jews in Australia should be rounded up and either concentrated in one place in Tasmania or expelled from the country? If you look at the stages of genocide, it starts with initially dehumanizing and preaching hatred against particular groups. And I believe in free speech, but I'm not a free speech absolutist, and I do not believe that it would be right to allow people to whip up hate, calling for the expulsion of all Jews from Australia, for example, or indeed sending Jews as a group to concentration camps or genocide. So there is a problem. The question is how you draw the line in terms of what you are able to say, what you're not able to say, and also which groups you're are trying to protect. When I looked through your draft bill yesterday, which I did very quickly, the glaring omission for me was that while if I was in Australia, the bill would try to protect me against people hating me because I'm of Pakistani ethnic origin, there would be no protection at all if people were trying to whip up hate against me because I'm a Muslim. And in the UK, we have a law, it's been on the statute book for 20 years, about incitement to racial hatred and incitement to religious hatred. Now, religious hatred has to be thought about very, very carefully. And in the UK, to avoid this law being misused by local police, you cannot bring a prosecution without the approval of the Attorney General, because we recognize that you want to be free to be able to criticize religion, criticize religious doctrines, promote your own religion. But there is a real problem, and provided the law can be well drafted, I support laws against incitement to either racial hatred or religious hatred. But politically, I think Australia should tackle both at the same time, rather than rushing to tackle anti-Semitism while ignoring hatred against Muslims, for example.
Can I ask you, Shane? I mean, first of all, I have to say, and I've said to many people, I don't understand what the hell's happening at the moment, because my wife's worked in the clothing industry all her life. Mm-hmm. And we work with Jewish people, has worked with Catholics, Church of England, Muslims, anything, Hindus, the whole lot. And never once, until just recently, never once had their religion or their culture been brought into it. I don't understand. I lived in a place called Mildura, and Mohammed, if you ever look at that, you'll see it's the last stop before hell. But And it is, but we were surrounded. It's a very multicultural community. We had the Greeks, the Italians, the Turks, anybody else wanted to pop up, they're all there. And we had names. They used to call us names, we'd call them names, and you'd laugh about it.
Yeah.
There was nothing, when the names we used were, like I was a Catholic, so I was a Catholic dog sitting on logs eating, that sort of stuff. And then there was the Italians, the Wogs, they were called, and the Greeks were probably called the same, and the Turks, other names, and no one worried about it. And we were all Australian. So Shane, where have we gone wrong? I mean, this does not make any sense because, let's leave out other countries. I mean, we've always had a bit of a rough, attitude towards our neighbours. But at the end of the day, no one gave a rat's, no one cared if you were Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Martian, whatever, Greek, whatever you wanted to be. No one gave a rat's, no one cared because we were all Australian. And to me, that would say there's even a deeper issue here. And I don't understand how we can get to this point because you are an Australian. Simple as that. Robbie is an Australian. Mohammed's a Brit. I mean, so what? That's what we are. So I don't know where we've gone wrong. Perhaps you can enlighten me because I think this is highly disturbing and very emotional because somehow, somewhere, we've been allowed to go off onto another path.
Correct, and it's an interesting question because my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and in the 1990s, he actually gave his testimony to the Spielberg Foundation, the Shoah Foundation that he set up after recording Schindler's List, and his poignant message, and I do mention this in my writing, was you are lucky to grow up in a country like Australia, free of the anti-Semitism we grew up with. Always be a proud Jew, be proud Australian, and never let anyone make you feel like a second-class citizen, and always be kind to all mankind. And that's how everyone lived. Greeks, as you said, Greeks, Italians, everyone came, around the 1950s, 60s, immigrated to Australia, adopted the culture here, and we became this rich tapestry of what Australia became. And if you would have asked me 6 years ago, have you ever experienced anti-Semitism, I would have answered no. But like for my children, they've experienced it. I think in some ways it's a question about immigration, and are we bringing in people who come here to adopt the Australian way of life and love the Western culture and that whole ethos, the Australian ethos of love thy neighbour, and almost she'll be right. And like you said, when I was a kid, I used to play with the children in my street. It didn't matter what nationality they were, and it was always exciting going into their homes when they were a different nationality because their mother would feed you something that was from their culture, and that was always wonderful. But I think that's what's happened, and maybe we have, and I think also we have the foreign influence, which we've seen over the last 30 years from potentially countries like Qatar who are pouring money into our academia and are driving this ideology where we have a problem with the younger generation where, in our days, we used to fly the Australian flag at school, and I attended a Jewish day school. We used to fly the Australian flag. We used to sing the Australian anthem with such pride, but today it's become so controversial for some reason. And you only have to travel to places like, Singapore and the UAE, and even if you travel to Israel. But even when I was in the UK a few years ago, I saw more flags than I'm lucky to see here these days. So I think that's where we've probably gone wrong.
Yeah, Robbie, I mean, I don't know where you grew up. I think I think you're from the bush. Am I correct?
Western Victoria and Central Queensland.
Well, you would have had a similar growing up, a childhood, probably not as bad. I've managed to stay out of jail. Having a policeman as a father certainly helped. I learned all the tricks early, but but we never had and I'm sure you're the same, we never had these issues. If you're Jewish, Anglican, Muslim, Hindu, whatever, no one cared. No one cared. You're all Aussies. And look at Usman Khawaja. I mean, he's a fantastic cricket player. He's an Australian cricket player that is Muslim. And it's probably Steve Smith in cricket is probably some other religion, or but who cares? They're all Australians, and I don't understand where the hell we've gone wrong. And we talk about and it was terrible, the killing of first of all 15 Australians and the Jewish Australians. It was just terrible, and the people that shot them, they're not typical. The typical Muslims. They are Muslims. But yet everybody's wanting to throw a sticker on all different groups. And what I can see, it was just these two very, very evil people that decided to kill innocent people, to massacre them. And then we have the politicians again. All about this virtue. I mean, it makes me sick, Robbie. I've got to tell you, it makes me want to vomit. Oh, we're going to stop the protests. I mean, part of Australia's heritage is that we are allowed to protest. And if we do that peacefully, but you can't blame the protesters for the killing of 15 Jewish Australians. You can't do that. And I don't understand where we've gone wrong. What do you think needs to happen here? I mean, and by the way, if you can ship in a couple dozen more politicians to replace the ones we have, including Minns from New South Wales, I would give you a big kiss on the cheek.
Well, first let me say that the most infuriating thing about politics to me, as someone who's involved in it in a minor party, is what people would call virtue signalling, etc. There's a habit in politics, especially Australian politics, but it's probably not unique to Australia, that politicians just want to be seen to be doing something in response to an issue, regardless of how effective that something may be. They've just got, as long as they can say, look, we did something. And that leads to this kind of rush to legislate all the time. I do, we can talk. I understand the sentiment that Australia wasn't always like this. I will say though, I do think the older I get and the more I read, I can it didn't seem like that when I was a kid, and we're probably all relatively within 20 years or so of each other. But you go back a bit further than that, and we did have real sectarianism here in Australia between Catholics and Protestants and those kinds of issues. We had in the 1930s we had secret armies training in the streets to take on Labor governments that were supposedly controlled by the Catholics and the communists. It has been willing in the past, but and today, we are in a multicultural country, and people say, well, why do we import these foreign conflicts into this country? And where I get very critical and perhaps controversial is my point is, well, we participate. It's too easy to say, oh, we shouldn't. People who live here should leave their foreign conflicts behind. We participate in those conflicts. We have willingly, as a country, gone and participated in those conflicts. And as someone who tried very hard to stop the Iraq War in 2003, which proved to be based on a total lie, and watched as we picked off the countries in the Middle East that were the worst, the biggest enemies of these horrific Wahhabi Islamists. I mean, Shane referenced the Qatari funding that's tied up in all this kind of stuff. People like Saddam Hussein, whatever you think of him, Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, Bashar al-Assad, these guys ran secular administrations that were the worst enemies of these extremists, who are the ideological fellow travelers of these shooters in Bondi, right, associated with ISIS, etc. And our governments backed the overthrow of those governments. And there's a massive disconnect there in how we play. We participate in foreign policy, where we need to take ownership of what we did wrong, and then turn around and say, "Oh, people in Australia shouldn't have opinions about it." But even that said, despite me saying that, I do think I'll come back to what I said first. We're talking these laws, and this conversation has been triggered by what happened in Bondi. And what I think we lose sight of is the crime itself and getting to the bottom of how that crime actually happened. And that's why I think, what should we do? We need to look at how our intelligence agencies have functioned, because they have enormous powers. These perpetrators were known to them, and yet they were able to accumulate weapons, travel to known terrorist hotspots, and then go and commit such an attack. And I think it's probably a huge distraction to start looking at the cultural side of it. Now, I'm not saying there's not issues there, but unless we get to the bottom of this attack and actually examine it properly, if we just get distracted on the sort of like the cultural argument about the politics of it and social cohesion, etc., we might be missing something really bad that we could address and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Mohammed, you understand. Actually, we're probably no different, except less severe at the moment than some of the turmoil in the UK. Where are we going wrong? For example, in Australia, I still believe that Australians. I actually left. I went to work in the US because I thought it was just like, oh, she'll be right, and it was for a long time. But I couldn't stand it. I wanted people to start thinking and acting and standing up for themselves and so forth. But when it gets to the information that's being passed around and the activity, information seems to be tainted either side. I mean, you can have all sorts of information, and you have legacy who are media pushing, they're pushing government. And government policy in many cases. Then you got the independent media, and they're pushing at times an alternate view of something, which is good. I think we all need to have a discussion about what is affecting us. But where do you think the biggest problem is? I mean, just using your experience in the UK, is it ignorance, do you think, or have we become because of pressures, for example, housing pressures in the UK and Australia? It does create a lot of stress. The economy is not going that well right now. There's all sorts of policies being brought in to try and fix things, which create even more stress. And does that add then to the concern that we're bringing in people from all over the world that haven't got a place, then their houses are sacrificed, or their accommodation is sacrificed? Or what do you think it is? I mean, because we need, I think, countries, and if I'm using my hometown as an example, multiculturalism when I grew up, and some say I haven't grown up, but when I was a kid, it worked like a dream, and actually it still does in the place I grew up. It works like a dream. Everybody is an Aussie, part of the community. Where is it going wrong in your mind?
Well, let me share with you a bit more about our experiences here in the UK. In the UK, first of all, is a great success story when it comes to integration. If you look at how the children of immigrants perform in the UK in education, in careers, etc., they do far, far better than any country in Europe. We are a great success story. Now, despite that being the big picture, if you look at the history of terrorism in the UK, it's undoubtedly the case that bad actors have tried to promote extremist views amongst Muslims. Al-Qaeda, ISIS from the Middle East with the internet, were able to spread poison into the UK, and the UK authorities have worked really hard to counter that. At the same time, we've seen a growing amount of far-right, white racist extremism being promoted as well. We have a program in the UK called Prevent, designed to stop younger people, normally younger people, being drawn into extremism. And a very large proportion of the referrals that they get are for potential Islamist extremism, but there's also a very significant, sometimes almost sort of 50%, the numbers vary, of people being drawn into far right sort of extremism, neo-Nazi stuff. And of course, we have bad actors like Russia actively seeking to promote division in British and other Western societies for their own international political reasons. So these are real serious issues. They do need to be countered, but we need to counter them in ways that preserve our sort of democratic freedoms. That's why our Racial and Religious Hatred Act is so carefully drawn. And I would encourage Australia to bring in legislation along those lines, but to do it in a considered way and not to rush into it. And in particular, to make sure that you are seen to be protecting all communities, because nothing would be worse than for the Australian Jewish community than for an impression to be spread that the Australian government wants to protect Jews but doesn't care about protecting anybody else. That would just be terrible politics.
And which is not true, but that is the impression that many have adopted. You mentioned bad actors such as Russia. I would dare say the bad actors, Mohammed, is your government. And if you look at your alternate government, such as Reform UK, they're going down the same path as the Tories, so they're not much chop either. So when you say bad actors such as Russia, if you look at Russia itself, it hasn't got the problems at the moment that the UK have and that we're starting to experience here.
Hold on, Mike. If you're trying to compare living in the UK, which is a free country, to compare to living in Putin's tyranny, Russia, where opponents...
I have to say you're wrong. I'm sorry, you are wrong in that. I mean, we have employed many people from Russia, and I have been to Russia. And we made a joke one day with someone in the car after I'd landed and was heading to Moscow, that if we were legacy media, we would have reported how terrible Russia was, tanks all over the place. But it was quite the opposite. And if you look at all the dissidents who are leaving, or those who are being persecuted because of free speech, and they're heading to Russia, if Russia was such a tyranny as the West portrays, then I'm sorry, they wouldn't be going there. So I think we need to probably stick to this. I disagree with you wholeheartedly about Russia. And then if you're looking at the conflict, it's the conflict between NATO and Russia again is NATO. So, but let's just we'll drop that one, because you and I could probably talk forever. And in fact, I do talk forever at times, and always told by many to stop talking so much. But I'm just thinking though, the bad actors, isn't that your government in the UK? Aren't they your government? I mean, whatever reason, it can't prosecute its case very well. And then if you look at your opposition, such as Reform UK, they're heading down the same path too. And the grievance that we have, which is, again, I don't agree with, but they're saying that their country is being taken away from them. So what do we do about that? Is it again, as I said before, is it just ignorance, or is it government, which I do believe is failing miserably, because they can't prosecute their case?
Well, let's come back to your comments about our government. And first of all, to put my cards on the table, I'm a fully paid up member of the Liberal Democrats Party. So I'm not carrying a candle for either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. I was a Conservative Party member for 36 years, but I left the day they chose Boris Johnson as party leader. But I would never describe either the current Labour government or all the previous Conservative governments or Labour governments before that as bad actors. I'm proud of our British governments, all of them. Could they do better? Of course they could do better. But the idea that somehow the British government or the Australian government can be described as bad actors while Russia is sort of seen as sort of good, I have a fundamental disagreement with you on, Mike.
But I have not said that Russia is doing good. But I'm saying to compare, or to go with the lines that we've heard so far about Russia and other countries that don't fit in with the Western agenda, I think that's wrong. But your bad actors are. I mean, if we're talking about, we have people in the UK that are talking about the UK heading towards a civil war. that itself would describe a great breakdown in communication at the lowest form. But if you're looking at what you're doing, your government is at the moment, both sides, Starmer and the others, they're terrible. The division that you have amongst the Brits, I've never seen that before. And unless we're getting everybody a conga line of dissidents, which we're not, everybody that we speak to from the UK, the vast majority, way over 90%, are all saying that they're heading towards a civil war, which I find gobsmacking.
The only people that I've seen talking about the UK and civil war are people like Elon Musk and others.
But he's not Brit. We're talking about the Brits.
Precisely, he's not British. I spent all my time listening to, following the respectable British media. My main newspaper is the Financial Times, The Economist. I do not see those newspapers talking about the UK heading towards civil war. I'm sure you can find nutcases saying exactly that, but you have to look at what actually the mainstream media are saying, what is reality, and what people choose to promote for their own narrow interests.
Tell me this, does the UK have a problem with radical Islam?
The UK does have a problem with radical Islam, as do many other countries. How big is that problem? It's grossly exaggerated. The problem is, of course, you only need two people, as we saw in Bondi Beach, to get some weapons and to be able to cause enormous harm, even if millions of other people are doing nothing. So it's a real problem, but the scale of the problem gets inflated in many cases for, again, political reasons, or because people want to try to sell media.
Mike, can I just jump in there? It also comes down to what ideology, what level of an ideology is the country willing to accept. And we seem to have an appetite to accept that ideology now because of votes in Australia. Look at Tony Burke. There's a conflict of interest in his role as Home Affairs Minister because if he is to expel an imam for preaching hate, then that's going to cost him votes. So, 1 million votes versus 100 votes, well, we know which way he's going to vote to save his own seat. But you mentioned, I think you spoke about Mildura, where you live earlier. Well, do you have that ideology that we have in main cities in Mildura? Probably not, and definitely not to that extent. And that's why you're still seeing that social cohesion, which we used to have here. And we shouldn't be tolerating an ideology of the radical Islamists, because if you look at some of the chants that they preach, would that be accepted if a Jew or a Christian said the exact same chanted the same phrase at a radical Islamist or someone in Tony Burke's seat? We wouldn't accept it, but we wouldn't condone it either. So why is it allowed aimed at a Jew or an infidel, which is anyone that's a non-believer?
Robbie, what's your main concerns, even though it's watered down and it's all over the shop at the moment, it's been smashed with the sledgehammer just about, what's your main concerns with the legislation or proposed legislation at the moment?
Well, the first version of it, the race hate crime section, was very worrying because it introduced these very fuzzy concepts and provisions. So, for instance, and Professor Ann Toomey, or Emerita Professor Ann Toomey, one of our leading constitutional lawyers, raised these concerns about for instance, the word promote, promotion of racial hatred beyond incite. Now, we already have incitement laws; they're standard in our country and in similar kinds of countries like the UK. We know what incitement is, and if that's not enough to capture what they wanted to capture, this term promote was very broad, very ill-defined, and people are saying, well, what gets caught up in this? And as I gave you the example from back in 2002, the Howard government initially came up with a definition of terrorism that could be applied to a nurse on a union picket line. And that came out after a lot of scrutiny, and this wasn't being allowed for this bill. So that part's gone, which is good. And I think, to my point about politicians looked like they wanted to be seated doing something, Albanese has said today it's not coming back. This Parliament's not going to pass it. That's gone. So he's just happy to look like he tried and failed. But what they're sticking with, put the gun laws aside, because that was sort of always going to be predictable. They'd come up with more gun laws. I happened to talk to gun dealers over my Christmas break, and it's just one of those things that I think that side of it, it's good to talk to the people who know the details, and that doesn't usually come out in a media-driven debate, the actual details on that side of it. But nevertheless, that part was always going to happen. What they've left, though, is, I think, equally disturbing, which is this ability to ban hate groups. Now, we already can ban terrorist organisations, right? That you can prescribe terrorist organisations, but now they're going to be able to ban or prohibit hate groups. But it's the details that matter, because it's retrospective. The minister will be given enormous powers to do this, and the law explicitly said there's no requirement for procedural fairness, and it can be based on somebody who's a member of a group, and member is not defined, right? So it's not like I'm in a political party. A member of our party is someone who paid money and signed a form. That's what it means to be a member of a political party. But what they're talking about with groups is very, very woolly, very fuzzy. And so membership is not defined. And the ban can be based on something a single member did currently or in the past that they deem comes under this category. And the minister can turn around and have that group banned. And Professor Toomey actually did a video today, or she posted it today, where she put out a scenario that she said is highly unlikely, of course, but that's not the point. She was illustrating that, as written, this bill, this law, could be used by a government to ban the opposition, the official opposition to that government. As written, it would be capable of doing that. And so, even though you can say, "Oh, well, that's highly unlikely," that's some extreme scenario, you shouldn't have laws that are written that way. And if whatever merit there is to the laws, they should at least be subject to a hell of a lot more scrutiny than this rushed time frame allows.
And even I read somewhere where someone had said that that if you said that Australia is the best country, you can get yourself into some trouble there too. And I think that's where it was rushed through. Mohammed, what should we do? What do we need to do to make? And first of all, I think the benefits of good multiculturalism, I think, they are enormous for countries. I mean, just personally, the culture and what you can learn is just enormous. It's just fantastic. But it's gone off track at the moment. So what do we need to do in Australia to get things back on track?
Take a deep breath and then organise a discussion involving both civil society groups and lots of lawyers, because law needs to be well written and well drafted. And then see if you can agree how you would define the promotion of hatred against both racial groups and religious groups in a way that preserves freedom of speech, preserves the right to take part in politics, preserves the freedom to promote your own religion and indeed to denigrate other religions. I've got no problems with somebody who wants to say that the Quran is a pack of lies and Muhammad made it all up. They're absolutely free to do that. But to see if you can come up with a definition of promoting hatred which works, which is narrowly drawn, which will catch bad actors who say that actually we should round up all Jews and send them to Auschwitz.
Which is just, that is abhorrent.
Absolutely.
And again, though, if I heard someone say that to someone, I'd probably punch them in the nose, because and that's terrible. I mean, I don't punch people in the nose, but you could
Well,
not
that
get.
would make you into a vigilante. I don't want vigilante action. I want the government to take
No, it's
legal
called Australian. We just give them a thump behind the ears. My dad used to with me. Can you tell me about your organisation, Mohammed? How you are bridging the gap?
We were set up 21 years ago. We were incorporated in, we're a company limited by guarantee under UK law, and we were incorporated in June of 2005. And we have a very narrowly drawn purpose. We can't change the world. We're not going to solve the problems in the Middle East. Our goal is very simple. It's to bring Muslims and Jews in Greater Manchester closer together. And because it's all too easy in a civil society to get on but live sort of parallel lives. I'll give you a personal example. I had Jewish friends at school because I didn't go to the religious assembly. The Jewish kids didn't go to the religious assembly. So we were all in a room by ourselves who got to know each other pretty well. I had a Jewish friend at university. I had Jewish colleagues at work. I was a partner in Pricewaterhouse eventually. But I have lived in Manchester, which has the second largest Jewish community in the UK, for over 50 years. I had never set foot inside a synagogue. I'd been to churches for weddings and funerals. I'd never, ever been to a synagogue until I got involved alongside other people in helping to set up the Muslim Jewish Forum. And similarly, there were lots of Jewish people who never set foot inside a mosque. We have brought people together, so I'm actually in synagogues, pretty often. Our goal is it's on the ground, grassroots relationships, friendship building, mutual understanding, and we focus purely on Greater Manchester. The Middle East is out of scope. In fact, as an example, the Bondi Beach attack, I was on, personally, I gave an interview on our BBC Radio 4 about that, Radio Manchester. But the forum did not issue any statements about Bondi Beach because that's not in Greater Manchester. When there was a terrible terrorist attack at a synagogue in Manchester on Yom Kippur, October the 2nd of last year, of course, we did issue a statement. I attended the vigil. Other people from the forum attended the vigil. But we focus entirely on Greater Manchester.
Shane, can you tell me about the Australian Jewish Association, and what you do, what the association's view on the proposed bill or whatever it's going to look like, and if you could just fill us in, because it's an important association, and you are very moderate, and I think we need a lot more of that.
Yeah, so the Australian Jewish Association, which I've been a part of for a little while now, is a centre-right organisation with a very high presence on social media and in the community as well. The organisation itself is, and one of the reasons why I'm proud to be part of it is very, very open to calling out different issues as we see it. So we don't hide behind political correctness. We call it out as we see it. On these proposed laws, the Australian Jewish Association has been opposed to them for a number of reasons. Number one being that it's as Robbie said, it was rather rushed through. And it's starting to smell of desperation. Where we see yesterday the Prime Minister was asking the opposition leader, what do we need to change in order to make it pass? And we don't want to be in a situation where we're just passing to tick boxes. The Prime Minister has had almost 2.5 years to do something about anti-Semitism, and it took a terrorist attack, not only on Jews, but non-Jews and Australian values to finally do something. And he's called a Royal Commission. The Australian Jewish Association has called it out. He called a Royal Commission simply because he was pressured into it, and he can divert in any way that he wants, such as proposing changes to gun laws, but we've been calling it out from the start. In its current form, the Australian Jewish Association does not support these new laws. There's just too many grey areas, and we could find ourselves subject to prosecution just by saying the wrong thing. Yet hate preachers could be exempt from prosecution, which has been a big part of the problem that we've seen over the last 25 or so months.
Robbie, do you think we have a problem with radical Islam?
Yeah, but now it will get controversial. Our governments sponsor it around the world and then deal with the consequences when it comes back here. That's the problem. That's why Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, revealed Hillary Clinton's emails during the 2016 election, and her fellow Obama administration officials were discussing the fact that they were on the same side as Al Qaeda in Syria. And I'm not going to stand by while people smear the whole Muslim community as radical Islam, which it absolutely is not. There is radical Islam, but there's radical everything as well. It's not just Islam that's radical, and there's one of my issues with the focus on the rise of what's called antisemitism in Australia in the last couple of years is it's talked about devoid of acknowledging that there's been a terrible conflict underway in Gaza that has really, really shocked people. And that has polarized the whole world, not just Australia. It's polarized the whole world. And it's too convenient for people to come along and say, oh, that's all anti-Semitism, or that's radical Islam. It's not. Our party has a very large Muslim component. I'm really glad to get to know Muslim Australians, because as a lily white Australian brought up in rural Queensland, you grow up with prejudices. You're just told this is what people are like, and you get to know the Muslim community in Australia, and they're as ochre and bogan as anybody. They'd fit in really well in Mildura, Mike. It's a real mistake. It's a real mistake to obsess with radical Islam. The part that is radical Islam, which is why these two shooters, or the son at least, was on ASIO's radar, right? Which was an association with groups that either promoted or were somehow linked to ISIS. That's real radical Islam. But it's not. But I think there's an overemphasis on the word Islam. This is a radical terrorist network. We saw what it was capable of, and we saw its mother, Al Qaeda, going back to what it was capable of. But they were on ASIO's radar, right? So if ASIO had have done its policing properly, right, would that even be an issue? Because given that there's 1 million or so Muslims in Australia, and the only two guys to take the law into their own hands in this horrific way. I shouldn't have even said that. We don't even know if that was the motivation. We don't even know what their actual motivation was. There's some assumption it was some kind of retribution for Gaza, but that's not even clear yet, right? This is not fully established. But these two men, out of 1 million Muslims, committed a horrific terrorist attack, right? And to just obsess with this term radical Islam in response to that, I think is absolutely wrong. We should be looking at the crime and following the perpetrators. Because let me make one other point. This is the worst terrorist attack in Australia, no doubt. But it's not the worst terrorist attack by an Australian. That was Brenton Tarrant in 2019 in Christchurch in New Zealand, and his target were Muslims. And he killed 50 Muslims. That's the worst terrorist attack by an Australian. And I'm not seeing, the obsession after that with radical Christianity. The religion didn't come into it, but don't kid yourself. His language, his philosophy was a perverted form of his religion, right? But we often don't apply the same standards. But before we get too carried away with these cultural debates, I come back to my main point. I think we need to examine this crime and get to the bottom of what actually happened and hold the responsible authorities, not blame them for it, but hold them to account properly. And that requires full transparency rather than these cultural debates or draconian laws that probably won't work anyway.
Mohammed, at the moment, Australia is a tinderbox at the moment, and the media is quite prepared to report, which it should, even though it does get it wrong sometimes and adds its opinion with little knowledge on that particular issues. But they do that. They've been taught to add their opinion. But what needs to be done? Because what I can see here, a great part of the problem is ignorance. It's just pure ignorance, and the media will say it's bad Muslims or bad this, whatever, and that's wrong. That is just purely wrong, and it's just like saying, all Australians, as Robert mentioned, all Australians are terrorists going to go and shoot people. So what do you think needs to be? Is it just ignorance? And part two of that one, where do you see, using your country as an example, where do you see the Australia heading? Is it going to get better by introducing laws upon laws upon laws to stop the hate speech? Very hard to stop someone's emotion. You can jail them or do whatever you like, and again, it's subjective to the person deciding to charge you for a hate speech crime. What do we do? Because I've got no idea.
Well, first of all, ignorance is always a problem, and it's important particularly in education in schools, to have broadly based education which emphasizes our common humanity and the fact that the civilization that we all value has come from multiple sources. It's not just a Christian civilization or a Jewish civilization. It's a civilization with multiple sources, of which Islam is one of them. What you're doing on gun laws is extremely important and very positive. Taking action on guns reduces the number of people who get killed by guns. I mean, you took major action about 30 years ago when there was a terrible killing. In that case, it wasn't politically motivated, but somebody wants to go out and kill people. You want to stop that. And taking guns away is highly desirable. I still think you would benefit from having well drawn up legislation about the promotion of hatred, but it does need to be well drawn up, and it needs to include all the communities that people want to promote hatred against. I mean, there's an enormous amount. We haven't talked about hatred of people on grounds of sexuality and so on, but there is, unfortunately, too much promotion of hatred going on. In many cases, as I said earlier, because it suits foreign states to promote such hatred in our societies. But I think if you take action like that, you can reduce the scale of the problem enormously. The UK, again, foreigners, particularly people like Elon Musk, like to try to paint the UK as a hellhole. London is safer than any in America, for example, but you wouldn't know that if you listen to American commentators. But what I do recommend that you learn from the way that the UK has drafted some of its incitement legislation. We've had our law on the statute book since 2006 about incitement to religious hatred, and it has not caused a problem.
So has it worked?
Yeah.
My question, Mohammed, is has it worked? Because I see a lot of vilification of Muslims in the UK. I mean, I agree in principle with what you say, that if you're going to have these protections, it should extend to religion as well as race. But my feeling on this is you got to ask, what's the efficacy? Do these things actually work, or do they just drive people's views underground? and then they bubble up in ways that you can't predict. There's a great movie from the 50s, 12 Angry Men, and there's a scene in there where one guy's being a bigot. And I think I'm not an expert, but I do tend to think it's a good example of how society should be. That when he starts ranting on with his bigotry, one by one, all the other men in the jury room get up and turn their back on him, right, to make him point. And that's if you can have a society that functions that way, it's potentially far more effective, because I don't see these laws really working. We've had racial vilification laws in Australia for 30 years, since the 90s, and groups are still being vilified, right? I just don't see them as working.
Shane?
I think it comes back to also, and you touched on it before, the education system. I think we need to learn more the lessons from history. But also we need to apply the existing rules, the existing laws, consistently across the board. We can't have that hate chants against one group that's acceptable, but then not acceptable against another one. And it comes back to, and it's probably a separate topic in itself, the whole concept of DEI. DEI all lives matter and all groups matter should be the topics, not just selective ones. But again, it come back to history. Those that fail to learn from the past are doomed to repeat it, and we're seeing much of it. My daughter was just returned back from Israel, and they were going to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and I said to her, "You're going to see the first half of that museum, the propaganda and the hatred, the expulsions." From the 1930s that when we visited, saw it as something from 80 years ago. But you're going to relate to it in a different way. And so we must learn the lessons from the past and avoid repeating it. But it comes back to, I mean, in a big way, it comes back to education, though education is not on its own.
And Robbie, finally, you have the final word. Your thoughts, and where do we go to from here? Can you legislate hate?
I just think it's very difficult. I think that the governments that are trying to turn around to their people and manage these social disruptions, they have to take responsibility for their role in the way we practice our geopolitics. Because I disagree with Mohammed on this idea, because I've been sick of it for 10 years. Our government's blaming all their domestic problems on bad actors like Russian foreign interference in Australia. It's Chinese foreign interference. But in 2019, ASIO announced that terrorism is no longer the threat to Australia, foreign interference is. And because I know a lot of people in the Chinese community who've been raided and harassed by ASIO over the last 6 or 7 years, this is the very same agency none of these people were extremists. None of them were terrorists. They just often were people born in China who are Australians now. And because the American administration said China's our number one adversary, ASIO fell into line with that. And that's the same year that ASIO had this young guy scrutinising him, and then went on to ignore him, right, what he was doing, because they're too busy raiding law-abiding Chinese people in the name of foreign interference. But we've got the same narrative about that. And it got so extreme that in 2024, we had a state funeral held here in Melbourne for a Ukrainian gentleman who was the Stefan Romaniev, who was the chairman of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the Global Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, which was founded by Stepan Bandera, whose followers perpetrated the Baba Yar massacre in Kiev in World War II, massacring tens of thousands of Jews. He has followers all around the world, including in Australia. And because we decided, along the lines of the narrative of the UK and the US, Putin's the bad guy, we whitewashed these people who are essentially Nazis. We gave this guy a state funeral, and Jewish members of Australian Parliament attended the state funeral for this guy, because we have this disconnect between what we do in geopolitics around the world, right, where we are the bad actors. Sorry, Mohammed, we often are the bad actors. And then what happens here on the home front. And that's what I think. There's no solution to this kind of thing unless there is a reckoning about what role we play on the international stage. That's one. And two, I think we need to examine really carefully what ASIO did and did not do in relation to this cell that was able to perpetrate this attack.
But then hopefully a lot of that will come out in the Royal Commission, and on that point when ASIO was removed by Albanese from the National Security Group. So it all needs to be on the table.
I agree.
It certainly does. Now, we have gone way over, and I apologise. Mohammed, thank you very much, by the way, for getting up early, 5 o'clock in the morning for you. Good job. Robbie, if somebody wants to find out more about what you do and the Citizens Party, tell us more.
Citizensparty.org.au, and you can get the Citizens Party on our weekly report on YouTube as well. We do too much to go through in short here, so just get online and have a look.
Okay, and Mohammed, your organisation does a magnificent job, and well done, by the way. We may disagree on Putin, but I do agree on many of the things you've brought up. If somebody wants to find out more about what your organisation does, how do they find out more?
Well, we are the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester. If you Google that, you'll find us. Our website is muslimjewish.org.uk. And one of the things I'm most proud of, it's a tiny website. If you just type the two words Muslim Jewish into Google, you'll get hundreds of millions of hits. We're normally in the first 10 or 20.
Good on you. And Shane, the Australian Jewish Association, which is a very good friend of what we do, and we admire what you guys do. Tell us how someone can find out more.
Yeah, so thank you for those comments. So our website is jewishassociation.org.au. Go to that website and you'll see plenty there and how you can either join or get involved.
Thank you very much, Robbie Barwick, Mohammed Amin, and Shane Schmel. Thank you so much for your time. This has been The Protagonists, and this is The World Today.